I woke up in the middle of the night. My bedroom door was slightly open. Outside, my son giggled with his wife holding a $18,000 check from selling a painting I created with blood and tears. They thought I didn't hear, but I did, and I remembered. The next day I vanished, taking with me the key that would bury their greed forever. If you think this is just another family drama, you're dead wrong. Subscribe now so you don't miss the shocking stories we bring you. Under the dim amber hue of early morning, the once vibrant world of Mrs. Evelyn Hartley seemed deceptively quiet. The scent of lavender lingered faintly on the curtain's edge. The old rocking chair let out a slow, tired creak, and the walls bore faded photographs of gallery exhibitions long past. At 72, Evelyn had been a name whispered in New York art circles with reverence. Her abstract oil works had graced everything from Brooklyn showcases to Paris salons. A widow of 21 years, her life now unfolded in the quiet suburb of Millgrove, where she lived with her only son Andrew and his wife Melissa. To the casual eye, she was a woman well cared for, an aging artist surrounded by family, a warm home and supposed peace. But behind the front door, behind the polite smiles and curated living room decor, Evelyn had become an afterthought in her own life. Andrew, once a curious boy who used to lie under her studio table watching brushstrokes dance to life, had grown into a man of calculated ambitions and hollow concern. Melissa, his perfect match, played the role of dutiful daughter-in-law flawlessly for guests, but behind closed doors, Evelyn was little more than a live-in relic of the past. It started with whispers, the insurance discussions, the subtle suggestions that perhaps she was overextending herself. Then came the stroke, brief, no more than a flicker. Evelyn had merely fainted while reaching for a ceramic mug in the kitchen. She woke up an hour later in a hospital bed with wires taped to her chest and Andrew frowning beside her. "You gave us quite a scare, Mom," he said, voice low but clipped. "The doctor says rest is absolutely critical now." Rest, she'd asked, still dazed. "I just got a little lightheaded." But the decision had already been made. Within 2 days, her bedroom on the second floor, her sanctuary, her world was emptied. Her easel was gone, her books boxed up, the oak-framed bed replaced with a rickety hospital cot that sat awkwardly in the laundry room turned storage down the hall from the kitchen. "We thought it'd be better for you to be on the ground floor," Melissa said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Less risk of falls, much safer." Evelyn blinked slowly, eyes sweeping across the cramped space. The once elegant mahogany armoire she'd used since college had been replaced by a flimsy plastic drawer set. Her personal oil collection, tubes of Van Gogh pigments and artisan brushes, was nowhere to be seen. "Where are my things?" she asked. "Oh, don't worry," Melissa chirped, flipping through her tablet. "We've stored the important stuff. You don't need all that clutter anymore. We're simplifying less visual stress." Less visual stress. Evelyn didn't argue. Not then. Her tongue felt heavy. Her body, though mostly recovered from the minor episode, had absorbed something else entirely, something darker. A slow realization. She wasn't being helped. She was being removed. The next day, Andrew disconnected the landline phone in her room. "Nobody really uses these anymore, Mom," he explained. "We'll set up a tablet for you so you can video call us if you need anything." The tablet required a password. It changed weekly. No one gave it to her. 3 days later, her mail stopped arriving. "We're going paperless," Melissa announced. "We'll manage your subscriptions from now on. One less thing for you to worry about." By the end of the week, Evelyn Hartley, an artist once celebrated in the New York Times, was living in a 9x10 utility room, eating off plastic trays and watching shadows crawl across cracked tile walls as the hours dripped by. Her daily schedule was enforced by silence. Breakfast appeared at 7:30, lukewarm oatmeal and black coffee. Lunch at 12:15, always boiled chicken or steamed rice. Low sodium, Melissa reminded her. Doctor's orders. Dinner was served at 600 sharp. By then the lights had dimmed and she was often alone for hours. She wasn't allowed in the studio anymore. Too many tripping hazards, Andrew insisted. When she asked about her paintings, the ones in the hallway and the basement in the old garden room, he waved her off. "They're in storage. You don't need to think about that anymore." That night, Evelyn stared at the ceiling of her new prison. Something in her ached, not her bones, not her muscles, but a deeper bruise, a hollowing. The silence was deafening. The lights buzzed with a tired hum. She reached instinctively toward the side of her cot, where she used to keep her leather sketchbook, the one she'd had since 1982. It was gone. Everything was gone. The following morning, through the cracked door, Evelyn overheard Melissa on a call. Her voice was soft but sharp. "Yes, 2 originals. Evelyn Hartley. Signed. We're thinking of listing them at Christie's next quarter. You'd be shocked how many she still had lying around." Silence, then laughter. Evelyn felt it then. Not confusion, not sadness, but clarity. Cold, crystalline, undeniable. They weren't caring for her. They were containing her, and they were selling her piece by piece. She didn't speak of it. She simply watched, listened, took note of which drawers they forgot to lock, which nights they went out late and left the door unbolted, which places still held echoes of the life she once had. But most of all, she remembered something Andrew had long forgotten, the tiny iron key on the chain around her neck. The key to a quiet little cottage she hadn't seen in decades. A cottage in the Hudson Valley, the one with the red shutters and vine-covered windows, the one where she had once taught orphaned children how to turn color into safety. And somewhere inside she knew it was time to go back, not to the past, but to herself. Under the sterile wash of early morning, Evelyn Hartley sat silently by the edge of her cot, the soles of her feet pressing into the cold tile floor. Her robe was thin, the kind hospitals issued in bulk, and though she was no longer in a medical facility, her life still pulsed like a ward-regulated, distant institutional. Her hands rested in her lap, veined and still like porcelain gloves waiting to crack. A breeze slipped in through the cracked window high above her, carrying with it the scent of fresh-cut grass and rain-dampened pavement. Somewhere birds were chirping, mocking maybe. She stared at the thin slit of light beneath the hallway door. Through that crack came life. Not her life, someone else's. Laughter, the shuffle of heels, the sound of something expensive being uncorked. Every morning at precisely 900 a.m., Melissa walked past the door in her trademark stilettos, click, 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 on her way to the kitchen, her designer perfume trailing behind like a signature. The luxury was subtle but unmistakable silk rustling the tinkle of crystal, the low murmur of Andrew's voice discussing return on investment or auction leverage. Sometimes Evelyn would press her ear gently to the wall. There were no paintings anymore, nothing to soften sound. She heard everything. Heard Andrew chuckle as he poured champagne, the faint fizz echoing like betrayal. Heard Melissa boast about her skincare regimen to a friend on speakerphone. "It's only $340 a bottle, not that bad." And Evelyn would sit in her cot knees, covered in a scratchy wool blanket, stomach half empty from yet another bowl of oatmeal, and listen. It was voyeurism, a kind of emotional masochism, but it reminded her she was still awake. One morning, while Melissa was out, Evelyn saw a flicker of movement at the corner of her door. It wasn't cleaning or food delivery this time. The door creaked open without a knock, slow, careful, strategic. Melissa stepped inside with a forced smile. Her outfit was flawless beige cashmere sweater tucked into crisp white pants, pearl earrings glinting as she tilted her head with practiced concern. "Oh, Evelyn, you're up," she said softly. Her tone was too sweet, too soft. It made Evelyn's spine stiffen. Melissa knelt beside the cot. "Just wanted to check on you. See how you're feeling today." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, not out of distrust. Melissa had earned that long ago, but calculation. "Fine," she answered, a clipped syllable, controlled. Melissa smiled wider. "That's wonderful. You know rest really does you good. You're glowing." Liar. Then, as if by accident, Melissa's hand swept the small plastic drawer beside the cot. It tugged open. A soft rustle papers, old letters, a faded photo of Evelyn with her husband on their wedding day. Melissa's fingers grazed the edge of the photo. "Oh, this is lovely." she whispered, though her eyes were calculating. Evelyn didn't move, didn't blink. Melissa smiled again. "We just want what's best for you, Evelyn. You know that, right?" She stood and walked out, but the drawer was left open just an inch, just enough to say, "I can take more if I want." Evelyn's hands trembled not from fear but fury. That night it rained. The windows rattled with the wind. Lightning split the sky in silent flashes, followed by low, delayed rumbles that crawled through the walls. Evelyn's cot creaked each time she shifted, as though protesting her discomfort. She couldn't sleep. She hadn't slept properly in weeks. At 2:14 a.m., her eyes finally shut, and then darkness changed. In the dream, the room was filled with children. Dozens. Their hands smudged with chalk and watercolors, faces blurred but familiar. They surrounded her. Some were laughing, others whispering, some crying, but all of them called her the same name. "Miss Evelyn. Miss Evelyn, remember us." A little girl with honey-colored braids reached for her, her cheeks tear-streaked. "You promised you'd finish my portrait, Miss Evelyn. You promised." A boy with lopsided glasses held up a sketchbook with blank pages, his eyes hollow. "Did you forget us?" Then a chorus, fragile and sharp like broken glass. "You left us. You locked the studio. Why did you stop painting?" Evelyn tried to speak, but her throat ached with grief. Her hands were covered in red paint, or was it blood? The studio walls wept color, and every brushstroke peeled like skin. And then she woke, gasping. Rain thrummed against the small window like a warning. The room was dark, cold. The nightmare still clung to her like a film of sweat. She sat up, breath ragged, reaching for something, anything. Her fingers found the old shawl tucked beneath her cot. She wrapped it around herself like armor and stared at the blank wall across from her. That dream wasn't fiction, it was memory. Each of those children had once sat beside her on small plastic stools in that sun-warmed studio in Hudson Valley. She had taught them how to turn grief into art, how to mix color into joy. She'd made them promises, that they mattered, that their voices mattered, and she'd broken them all. No, Andrew and Melissa hadn't just stolen her art. They had stolen her ability to keep those promises. The next morning, Evelyn sat silently at the table in the living room. A rare allowance. Melissa had invited her to join them for breakfast, claiming it would be lovely for family bonding. Evelyn accepted, curious. They served her toast and coffee in a chipped mug. Melissa tapped her phone, lips curled. "Andrew, tell Mom the good news." Andrew wiped jam off his chin and cleared his throat like a man who'd just closed a deal. "Remember that old abstract you did back in the 80s, the one with the river and the red sun? Well, sold it last week. 17,800, he grinned. Guy from London. Big-time collector. Said he'd been looking for a piece like that for years. Evelyn's stomach turned. That painting had been called Mercy. She'd painted it after burying her father. It had taken her 6 months to finish 6 months of grief, silence, and unbearable loss spilled onto canvas. She whispered, "You sold Mercy." Andrew raised a brow. "It's just a painting, Mom. It was collecting dust." Melissa added, "You should be happy. It's funding our trip to Santorini. We're bringing you back something from Greece." Evelyn didn't reply. Instead, she looked out the window. A boy with lopsided glasses stood there beneath the oak tree in the backyard. He was just a ghost of memory, but this time she didn't blink him away. She let the sorrow in, let the betrayal burn, because grief was fuel, and fire meant movement. They thought she had forgotten, but she hadn't, and now they would remember. The sky had already begun its descent into nightfall when Evelyn Hartley found herself alone in the house for the first time in weeks. The silence was different now, not the usual suffocating kind that pressed against her chest like grief, but a rare, open quiet. Andrew and Melissa had gone out to a dinner party downtown. She'd overheard Melissa giggling earlier, describing it to a friend as a who's who of buyers with deep pockets. Champagne and strategy, no doubt. They wouldn't be home until late, possibly drunk, probably smug, and Evelyn knew it was now or never. She sat up in her cot with more steadiness than she had in months. Her hands, though marked by age, moved with practiced intent. She reached beneath the thin mattress to where a corner had long been torn, revealing the hollow seam she'd once sewn, shut herself with dental floss. Her fingers slipped inside and pulled out a worn leather notebook edges, curling pages, yellowed cover marked with oil stains and graphite smudges. Her sketchbook, not just any sketchbook. This was the one she had started the year after her husband died. The year she had taught a group of foster kids how to paint the world they wanted to live in. Each page held more than drawings, they were vows, silent promises, echoes of laughter, proof of purpose. She flipped it open to the first page. A crooked smile, a pair of missing teeth, a girl named Tasha with freckles and a fierce grip on a brush too big for her hands. Evelyn had drawn her in charcoal after their last session. The girl had hugged her so tightly she could barely breathe. "You're the first person who ever told me I was good at something," Tasha had whispered. Evelyn closed the book gently like a prayer. Her hand then reached toward the second treasure. Hung around a rusted nail at the far end of the room beneath an old shawl was a chain, thin, tarnished, unnoticed for years. She pulled it down carefully. Dangling from the chain was a small brass key, shaped like a leaf engraved with a barely legible WV. Wren Valley, the cottage. God, it had been years, long before Melissa. Long before she surrendered her name to utility bills and next-of-kin paperwork. It had been her sanctuary, a one-story craftsman-style home tucked between a cluster of pine trees upstate, once alive with the scent of turpentine and laughter. The place she had used to run free art classes for orphans and children in the system. She had painted with them under wide windows that drank in the golden hour. They had called it Miss Evelyn's lighthouse. It had been her haven. Now it would be her escape. She slipped the sketchbook into a canvas tote, looped the key around her neck, and took a long breath. The walls around her felt like they were watching. But she didn't flinch. Not tonight. She pulled on a beige coat, Melissa's old one, slightly too tight at the shoulders, and tucked her silver hair under a navy knit cap. She slid into the hallway with the soundless grace of someone who had spent years learning to disappear in her own home. She paused at the end of the corridor. The house yawned with darkness, and then thunder, rain. She stepped outside and shut the door behind her, not daring to lock it. Her heart thudded in her chest like a frightened bird. She took her first real step into the storm. The cold air slapped her cheeks. She gasped, but she kept walking. The sidewalk was slick and silver under the downpour. Her shoes were soaked by the second block. She didn't stop. There was a gas station about 4 blocks away. She remembered it from when she still ran errands. It had an old payphone. She reached it with her coat plastered to her body, rain cascading from her hat and collar. Her hands, trembling but determined, reached into the tote bag. Inside, wrapped in parchment and pressed between 2 pages of her sketchbook, were her emergency savings bills and coins she'd collected over the last 3 years. Money she'd hidden in the lining of frames rolled into the ends of paintbrushes, stuffed behind the backing of canvases too large for Melissa to bother with. 62.45. She fed the coins into the payphone, dialed the number she'd scribbled down weeks ago after eavesdropping on a driver Andrew had used. The phone rang once. "Yellow cab, Mid-Hudson District," the man answered. "I need a ride," she said. "Where you at?" She gave him the address. The voice on the other end whistled. "Lady, that's more than an hour out of town. You got the fare." "I have cash," she said, gripping the coins in her palm. "And I'll pay extra if you come now." There was a pause. "Be there in 20. She hung up and crossed the street to the liquor store's awning. She stood in the corner, shivering. A teenager glanced at her but said nothing. 23 minutes later, a yellow cab pulled into the lot. She climbed in. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "You okay, ma'am?" She nodded, teeth chattering. "Just drive." They left the city limits behind within 15 minutes. It was close to midnight when they hit the winding roads. The rain had become gentler, almost whispering now. Trees blurred past the window like shadows reaching out, and Evelyn leaned her forehead against the glass, watching the reflection of the key swinging against her chest. Almost there, the driver muttered. Then finally the turn. A rusted road sign half covered in ivy, Wren Valley, private drive. He pulled up to the base of the hill and stopped. "This as far as I go, ma'am." Roads washed out from the storm. Evelyn handed him all the bills she had left. "Thanks," he said, counting, then softening when he saw her expression. "You sure you'll be okay up there alone?" She nodded. "I've never been more sure of anything." She stepped out into the rain again. This time it didn't feel sharp. It felt like baptism. Her boots sank slightly into the mud as she climbed the hill. Her legs screamed with each step, knees grinding like rusted hinges, but she didn't stop. The cottage came into view like an old friend emerging from fog. Still standing, still waiting. The shutters hung crooked now, and ivy had overtaken the porch rail. But the lamp, oh, the little copper lamp by the window, was still there, dust-covered but intact. She climbed the stairs, heart racing. She reached for the key. It slid in like it had never left. The door opened with a long, aching creak. Inside was darkness layered in dust, furniture draped in white sheets like ghosts in mourning. But under it all, life. Her easel still stood in the corner. The kiln was still in the sunroom, and on the windowsill, exactly where she left it, a single mason jar full of dried paintbrushes. She stepped inside and closed the door. The wind howled outside. Inside she was free. She took off her coat and hat, shook the rain from her hair, and sat in the center of the room on the hardwood floor. For the first time in what felt like years, she wept. Not from fear, not from grief, but from the kind of relief that only comes after surviving something you weren't sure you'd ever escape. Tomorrow she would clean. Tomorrow she would find the old power box and maybe fix the plumbing. But tonight she would sleep, here, in the place that remembered who she was long after everyone else forgot. Miss Evelyn, the woman who once taught lost children how to turn pain into color, and who was now ready to do it again, for herself. The morning after her escape, Evelyn Hartley awoke to the sound of rain tapping lightly against the window panes of Wren Valley Cottage. She lay there on the hardwood floor, cocooned in a wool blanket she had found in the hall closet, her body aching from age and effort, but her spirit oddly at peace. It was the first morning in years she hadn't woken to a plastic tray of lukewarm oatmeal, a knock from someone who didn't care, or the hollow echo of her own invisibility. She sat up slowly, muscles creaking in protest. The cottage was dim, but daylight streamed in through a crack in the boarded window, catching motes of dust in a slow, glittering dance. The silence here was not oppressive. It was sacred. She could feel the memories sleeping in the walls. Pushing to her feet, Evelyn reached for her cane, an old walking stick she'd carved herself decades ago. She limped across the living room, pulling back one of the dusty curtains. Light spilled across the wooden floors, revealing the wreckage of time cobwebs hung like lace across the ceiling beams, and years of dust blanketed every surface like forgotten snow. The air smelled of old varnish pine and something soft and earthy like a forest holding its breath. She took it all in without fear. This was her ruin, and she would reclaim it. The first place she went was the studio. It was tucked behind a sliding barn door she and her husband had installed in the 80s. The track groaned, but the door opened. The air inside was colder, heavier. The windows were coated in grime, but sunlight still filtered through, catching fragments of color that danced across the floor like lost spirits. She stood still for a long time. All along the far wall were faded brushstrokes, handprints, and scrawled names in crayon and chalk. Jasmine, 2003. Corey was here. Miss Evelyn's rules. 1. No erasing joy. Paint what makes your heart big. Her throat tightened. These were the fingerprints of the forgotten, the lives she'd tried to shape, the small, wild souls who had entered this room crying and left with dreams. She had given them color, and in return they had left her a legacy time couldn't erase. She moved slowly through the room, pulling white cloths from the furniture, revealing easels, chairs, a battered cabinet full of half-used supplies. Everything was covered in decay, but not ruined. This was salvageable. This was hers. She spent the rest of the day in silence, opening windows to let the cottage breathe again. The air was crisp and healing. She swept the floors in small, deliberate circles, each stroke of the broom stirring both dust and memories. She wiped down shelves, coughed through clouds of old mildew, and used her elbow to push open stubborn doors that hadn't been touched in years. There was a rhythm to it, sweep, dust, breathe, remember. By nightfall she had carved out a corner of the studio clean enough to work in. The rest could wait. She didn't need perfection. She just needed space. She sat down on the old metal stool by the window, fingers trembling with a blend of fatigue and urgency. Her right hand, her dominant hand, still hadn't fully recovered from the minor stroke. She could clench it, curl it slightly, but the precision needed to draw fine lines had not returned. She stared at it, willing it to obey, but it didn't. So after a long pause, she reached for the charcoal with her left. The grip felt awkward, foreign, like borrowing someone else's limbs. She pressed the charcoal to the yellowed canvas she had pinned to a board. Her lines were shaky, uneven, but she didn't stop. She drew the outline of a face. Not any one child in particular, but a composite. The memory of dozens, eyes wide, brows furrowed with hope, cheeks round with youth and hunger. She let the image form, not fighting her hand, just guiding it softly. When she stepped back an hour later, the drawing looked crude. But it lived. Her fingers were smudged black and her palms ached. She wept, not with sorrow, but with arrival. The next morning she returned to the canvas and picked up where she left off. Her left hand began to learn, awkward at first, but stubborn. Like her. Each line took 10 times longer. Each shadow required multiple attempts. But there was something sacred in the effort. It humbled her. It forced her to feel every mark. And somewhere in that process, her heart, bruised and silenced for so long, began to stretch awake. The cottage became her monastery. She no longer heard the echo of Melissa's stilettos or Andrew's financial murmurs. Instead, there was birdsong in the morning wind through pine trees in the afternoon and the crackle of the old fireplace in the evenings. She cooked simple meals, lentil soup, scrambled eggs, and lit candles when the sun went down. The sketchbook became her confessional. She filled page after page. Children's faces, rain clouds over rooftops, hands, dozens of them, each reaching for something just off the edge of the page. She painted with oils again, using long-handled brushes and globs of color that she mixed slowly, deliberately, like brewing magic. One night, after finishing a piece that had taken her 3 days, a scene of a girl with dragonfly wings perched on a cracked windowsill, she stood back and whispered to no one, "I remember who I am now." Her left hand, once timid, now danced, not gracefully, but with fire. And every smudge, every jagged line, every too thick stroke carried something purer than technique. It carried defiance. This was the art of a woman who had been buried and dug her way out with broken fingers. The next day she pulled the plastic off an old trunk in the attic and opened it. Inside were stacks of letters, crayons, paintings from former students, drawings given to her on birthdays. One note scribbled in orange marker read, "Miss Evelyn, I love you more than soup." She laughed, out loud. The sound echoed down the hallway and made her heart flutter. She pinned those drawings along the wall of the studio, taping them up gently, arranging them like saints in a chapel. Every time she felt tired or unsure, she looked at them. They reminded her why she had picked up the brush again. They reminded her that every stolen year could still be answered. And so she worked, not for a gallery, not for praise, for herself, and for the children who had once believed in her when she had nothing left. At night she lit incense and sat on the floor beside her canvases. Sometimes she meditated, sometimes she sang quietly, but mostly she just stared at the ceiling, whispering thanks to a universe that had given her one last window of time. She didn't know where this path would lead. She didn't care, because for the first time in decades, Evelyn Hartley was not waiting for someone else to decide what her life should be. She was building it again, with her left hand, and with all the pieces of her soul she'd once been told were useless. They weren't. They were her power, and she had only just begun. The storm that had greeted Evelyn Hartley's first night back in Wren Valley had long passed, but something new, something equally electric, still stirred in the air. She could feel it in her fingertips. Her left hand, now steadier, moved with quiet certainty across the canvas, as if time itself had softened to accommodate her return. Days bled into each other like watercolors. The cottage, once silent and asleep, had begun to hum with energy. Sunlight danced again across the paint-splattered floorboards. The smell of linseed oil soaked the air, and the walls, once blank with dust, now carried sketches, test strokes, and raw expression. But Evelyn knew this revival could not remain hidden forever. One morning, after finishing a series of 5 small paintings, each one faceless, each one aching with memory, she sat at the old oak table with her tea and stared at them. The first depicted a figure alone in a hallway filled with shadows. The second, a pair of hands reaching toward a closed window. The third, a single rocking chair in a flooded room. The fourth, a child's abandoned backpack on an empty porch. The fifth, a wrinkled hand pressing against glass from the inside, as if pleading to be seen. They had no names, no signatures, only emotion. Evelyn realized they were confessions hers. But they were also universal. Loss, erasure, betrayal, longing. The invisible truths that lived behind closed doors in households polished for perfection. And though she'd painted them to unburden herself, she began to wonder, what if someone else needed them too? That night she sat before the old laptop she'd recovered from a kitchen drawer, dusty battery barely holding a charge but still alive. She connected it to the spotty Wi-Fi signal she'd installed years ago for her art students. Amazingly, it still worked. She opened the browser, trembling slightly, and created a profile on a social platform for visual artists. She stared at the required fields. Username required. She typed, "No name painter," then deleted it, paused, typed again, "Nameless brush." No. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. What am I now? A mother unclaimed, a woman unseen, a voice returning. Her fingers hovered. Then, as if pulled by something deeper, she typed, "The anonymous painter." No photo, no bio, no links. Just a single line beneath the name "Art is the last place they can't silence me." She uploaded the 5 faceless paintings, no captions, no hashtags, just the images. Then she shut the laptop and went to bed. She didn't expect anything, but by morning the world had found her. Her inbox had over 60 notifications. The paintings had been shared nearly 1,000 times, reposted by small art pages, healing groups, and accounts with captions like, "This is what my divorce felt like," or "My mother could have painted this." One comment read, "Whoever you are, you've just told my story better than I ever could." Another, "I've never cried at a painting before, thank you." Evelyn sat still, her tea growing cold beside her. It had been decades since her work had touched people like this. Decades since anyone had called her art necessary. The next day, she posted another piece. A grayscale painting of an elderly woman sitting across from her own reflection, which stared back blankly like a stranger. Still no name. Still no face. It went viral overnight. Someone from a major account messaged her privately offering to represent her anonymously. She declined. 2 days later, a young woman named Rachel from a nonprofit organization called the Art Nest sent a direct message that simply said, "Dear anonymous painter, we've been following your work with awe. We run art therapy classes for neurodivergent children, many of whom are nonverbal. Your faceless portraits have become part of our weekly curriculum. The kids call them the heart faces. Would you ever consider collaborating, even virtually? We'd love to provide a space where your art can become a language for those who don't have one." Evelyn's hands trembled as she read the message. She sat in the middle of the studio for nearly an hour, the laptop still open in front of her. A wind stirred through the slightly cracked window, rustling a drawing pinned to the far wall, the one with the little girl in dragonfly wings. She thought of Tasha again, of Corey, of the many children who had walked through her studio doors in this very cottage and left their colors behind. She had called them her heartbeats. She responded, "Yes, but only if we keep it quiet. I don't want attention. I just want to give back what I almost forgot I had." Rachel replied within minutes. "Of course, we understand. We'll protect your anonymity. Let's create something together." Within a week, Evelyn had organized a virtual session using a secure video platform. Rachel set up a classroom camera in a bright, airy room filled with beanbags, easels, and children of all shapes and colors. Most were between 6 and 12 years old. Some rocked gently in their seats. Others tapped markers against the tables. A few stared into the camera wide-eyed with curiosity. Evelyn kept her video off. She didn't need them to see her. She just needed them to feel her. She shared her screen and began to paint in silence. She used her left hand, working slowly and intentionally. The children watched, One by one they began to mimic her strokes. Some added their own shapes. Some scribbled wild colors. One child painted a blue sun with green rays. Rachel whispered through the mic, "They're engaging. More than usual. They recognize your rhythm." Evelyn said nothing. She just kept painting. After the session, Rachel sent her photos of the children's work. One girl had drawn a figure with a faceless head, but a radiant golden chest. On it she had written, "This is my brave part." Evelyn wept for the first time in days, and then she painted again. The sessions continued weekly. She never gave her name. The children never asked, but they came to know her through brushstrokes, through pauses, through the way she colored sorrow not in black, but in violet and ochre. She became something she never thought she could be again, a mother, not to Andrew, not to Blood, but to these strange, glorious children who saw what she offered without expectation, and slowly something shifted in her. She laughed more, cooked fuller meals, took walks in the nearby woods, and brought back pine cones and feathers for the studio. Her hair, once brittle and graying, now grew soft with care. Her hands, still imperfect, still shook, but they shook with purpose now. Word of the anonymous painter spread, but she remained hidden, letting the art speak, letting the children answer. One evening she painted a boy alone in a rainstorm, holding a red umbrella too small for his head. She posted it with a single caption, "You don't have to be fixed to be beautiful." It was shared 90,000 times. The children in the program drew their own umbrellas the next day, some huge, some shaped like hearts, some full of holes. Rachel emailed her a scan of a drawing from a nonverbal boy named Eli. It was just a single shape, a crooked house with a glowing window and a caption written by his assistant. "She makes me feel like I'm not outside anymore." Evelyn printed it and taped it to the wall above her bed. That night she dreamed of the studio in full bloom again. Walls echoing with laughter, paint dripping off brushes, and small hands smudging color across every surface they could reach. And when she awoke, it no longer felt like a dream. It felt like a beginning. The internet had always been a noisy place, but lately there was a particular hum growing in a very specific corner of it. It began in art circles, spread to mental health forums, then seeped into the feeds of grief support groups and disability advocates. Whispers became questions, questions became threads, threads turned into theories. Who was the anonymous painter? Each new faceless canvas went viral faster than the last. There were no gallery signatures, no watermarks, just raw, aching emotion rendered in surreal forms, a figure crawling across a checkered floor made of regret. A tree growing out of a cracked teacup, a blindfolded child feeding light to a crow. The images stirred something collective, something many couldn't name but instantly recognized. "She paints what my therapist can't say out loud," someone tweeted. The mystery only made it worse, or better. The absence of identity gave the art more power. Speculation exploded. Was it a reclusive European artist staging a comeback? A trauma survivor using art as a confessional? An AI experiment? By week 3, Reddit threads dedicated to the anonymous painter had racked up hundreds of thousands of views. TikTok creators posted emotional duets with the image's voiceovers layered in piano music. "This is what healing from betrayal looks like." Hashtags multiplied. Hashtag nameless art, hash the soul knows, hash she paints me, and with virality came the inevitable. A journalist came knocking. It was a Tuesday morning when Evelyn first heard the car tires crunch over the gravel driveway. She looked out from the cottage window, mug of chamomile tea warming her hands. A blue sedan pulled up, clean, reserved. The kind of vehicle that screamed, "I have credentials but don't want to intimidate." The woman who stepped out was in her late 30s, hair in a neat braid boots that could handle rain but still looked good on camera. She carried a leather satchel and a clipboard. Evelyn felt her stomach tighten. She stayed hidden behind the curtain. The knock came 3 times, soft but assertive. "Ms. Hartley." "My name is Grace Lynn. I'm with the Observer. I'd love to speak with you." Silence. "I won't take more than 15 minutes. I'm here to talk about your work. I believe you're the anonymous painter." Evelyn remained motionless. "You don't need to confirm or deny. I just want to understand." Your paintings have changed people's lives." Still she didn't respond. She heard the shuffle of feet on the porch, then a card being slid beneath the door. "If you change your mind, I'll be in town until Thursday." The car pulled away. Evelyn didn't move for 10 minutes. When she finally bent down and picked up the card, she felt the slight tremble return to her hands. She turned it over. Grace Lynn, feature journalist. Personal email. Direct cell. No social handles. Professional. She could have been dangerous, but she wasn't unkind. Evelyn tucked the card into the back of her sketchbook where it stayed untouched. That evening she painted a figure with no mouth, just eyes wide open staring into an empty mirror. She titled it, "You Don't Owe Them Your Voice." Miles away in a quiet suburban home now unnervingly sterile, Andrew Hartley stood in his mother's old bedroom staring at the empty cot. The room hadn't been touched in over 2 weeks. Melissa hovered near the door, arms crossed, her voice sharp with unease. "She's not at the hospital, not at a care center. I've called all of them." Andrew turned face pale. "You're sure?" Melissa scoffed. "I'm not an idiot, Andrew. She's not on any of the elder watch lists either. No nursing home admissions. Nothing." He walked past her down the hall to his office. He opened his laptop and clicked into the family's shared financial portal. The savings account was untouched. The retirement account, too. But the checking account. He squinted. Several small ATM withdrawals from random stations, all under $100, all in cash. The last one was 3 weeks ago at a gas station in Millgrove. He clicked open the property registry, heart racing. He paused. "She transferred ownership," he whispered. Melissa appeared beside him. "What?" He turned the screen. Evelyn's name was gone from the family home's title. She had sold it to a third-party investment group. The documents were filed 2 days after their dinner party, the same week she vanished. Melissa's eyes widened. She sold the house. Andrew looked up, something foreign flickering in his gaze. Shame, grief, maybe just fear. "She planned this, and she didn't leave a cent behind." Melissa hissed. No note, no explanation, just gone. Andrew stood. "We need to find her," Melissa scoffed. "And do what? Drag her back? She's probably off somewhere painting daffodils and drinking herbal tea like some goddamn bohemian." Andrew didn't answer. He walked to the hallway closet and pulled down a dusty box marked Dad, Wills, and Old Property. 10 minutes later he found it. The deed to the Wren Valley cottage, untouched since 1987. He knew the place. They used to go there once a year when he was a child. He remembered climbing trees and painting on stones. He remembered her laughter back when it was real. Back before he turned 14 and things got cold between them. Before she started seeing him as someone who might leave like his father had. Before he started seeing her as an anchor he wanted to cut. He ran his finger over the faded address. "Get in the car," he said. Melissa blinked. "Are you serious?" "We're going to Wren Valley." The drive was long and tense. Melissa spent most of it scrolling through her phone, angrily swiping through headlines. "Look at this," she said, turning the screen to Andrew. "Another article about this anonymous painter. This one's on Buzz Culture. People are obsessed. They're saying it's a woman who used to teach kids, some former art therapist." Andrew clenched the wheel tighter. "She's not selling the work either," Melissa added. "She's giving it away. No galleries, no commissions." Andrew didn't answer, but his knuckles were white. Melissa lowered the phone. "She's winning," she whispered, "and she didn't even need us." By the time they pulled up the long, winding gravel road that led to Wren Valley, the sun had dipped behind the trees. The house looked like something out of a painting itself, aged, vine-covered, timeless. A faint glow spilled from a window on the right. Andrew killed the engine. They sat in silence. "What if she doesn't open the door?" Melissa asked. "She will," he said, but he didn't sound confident. He stepped out of the car, his shoes crunching on wet leaves. Melissa followed reluctantly, arms wrapped tightly around herself. They approached the porch together. Andrew knocked once, then twice. A long pause, then footsteps. The door creaked open. Evelyn stood there, framed by warm light. She wore a long gray sweater, her hair loose and shining silver under the lamplight. Behind her, canvases leaned against every wall. Color bled into the room like music. Andrew's mouth opened, but no words came out. Melissa stepped forward. "Hi, Evelyn," she said softly. "We've been looking for you." Evelyn's face didn't move. "I know." Andrew finally found his voice. Why didn't you tell us?" She looked at him, truly looked as if seeing the boy she had once held at 4 years old sobbing after scraping his knee. And she said, "Because I didn't want to be stopped." Melissa shifted. "Can we come in?" Evelyn considered them, considered everything, then stepped aside just far enough. Briefly, they entered the house, the warmth a strange contrast to the frost between them. And though neither Andrew nor Melissa knew it yet, this would be the beginning of their reckoning. The brushstrokes of Evelyn's life had already painted their exit. They were merely walking into the frame. The cottage smelled of rosemary and turpentine. Evelyn had lit a small burner in the corner, letting herbs simmer over low heat while she worked. The fireplace crackled with a quiet rhythm behind her, and the windows were fogged with the heat of the room meeting the late autumn chill outside. She stood in the studio's heart, wiping her hands on a faded linen cloth. The sleeves of her sweater rolled up to her forearms. Her latest piece, one she hadn't shared online, rested on the easel before her, still damp. It was not like the others. It was personal, painted in subtle oils layered with weeks of contemplation. The piece depicted a long wooden dinner table suspended in a void. Around it sat no faces, just empty chairs. In the center of the table was a single dish, a cracked porcelain bowl gleaming under a phantom light. No food, no hands reaching for it, just the silent question, who deserves a seat? She hadn't titled it yet. She hadn't signed it either, but the silence around it was enough to let her know it was finished. When the knock came, she knew exactly who it was. She had known since she saw the tracks in the mud near the porch earlier that afternoon. City tires. SUV probably leased. Not the kind of vehicle the local mailman drove. She washed the paint off her hands with calm, methodical strokes, dried them, and walked slowly to the door. Through the window she could already see them. Andrew and Melissa. No, not Andrew and Melissa. Not anymore. Not her son. Not her daughter-in-law. Just two well-dressed strangers carrying too much nervous energy and not enough truth. She opened the door. They both stood under the overhang of the porch, trying to appear casual. Andrew's hands were shoved into his coat pockets. Melissa clutched her leather purse like a shield. "Hi, Mom," Andrew said, voice carefully measured. She said nothing. Melissa stepped forward, smile already in place. Wow, this place is still here. Looks cozy, nostalgic." Evelyn tilted her head, studying her like a foreign painting in a museum. Melissa cleared her throat. We wanted to talk, maybe reconnect." Evelyn stepped aside and gestured for them to enter. Inside, the warmth enveloped them immediately. The room glowed with soft lamplight. The smell of canvas and wood oil thickened the air. Melissa looked around, her eyes darting over the sketches on the walls, the brushes lined in delicate ceramic jars, the small record player humming in the background. "It's beautiful," she murmured. Evelyn didn't answer. She moved past them, walking slowly into the studio space. "I wasn't sure you'd let us in," Andrew admitted, standing awkwardly near the threshold. "You're not in," Evelyn replied. "You're visiting." Melissa's mouth twitched. Fair enough. There was a silence. Then Andrew stepped forward. "Mom, look. We've made some mistakes. I've made some mistakes. But it doesn't have to stay that way." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Melissa and I have been talking," he continued. "We think maybe it's time to bring things back together. As a family. We've missed you." Melissa chimed in, voice sticky with practiced compassion. "We know it got tense, but family fights, family heals. Maybe it's time we come back together." Evelyn turned to face them fully now. Her eyes were sharp, unreadable. "Come back together," Andrew nodded eagerly. "Exactly. Let's figure it out. Rebuild." "I see," she said quietly. Then she walked over to a side shelf, lifted a flat canvas wrapped in brown paper, and handed it gently to Andrew. He blinked. "What's this?" "A gift," she said. He unwrapped it slowly, Melissa leaning over his shoulder. Their breath caught. It was a painting, one Evelyn had never posted, never hinted at. The background was deep crimson and gray, textured like fraying velvet. In the center stood a family of 4, rendered faceless as always. But this time the figures were transparent, barely there. Around them swirled a storm of gold script like poetry erased and rewritten. At the bottom in firm brushstroke, a title, "Family is not for sale." Andrew swallowed hard. "This is incredible." Melissa's mouth pressed into a thin line. "This is about us, isn't it?" she asked. Evelyn smiled gently. "It's about truth." There was silence. And then Melissa's voice rose. "Is this supposed to be clever or cathartic? You think handing us a painting makes up for abandoning your family?" Evelyn's face remained still. "I didn't abandon anyone. I freed myself." Melissa's cheeks flushed. "This is manipulation." Evelyn looked down at the painting now resting in Andrew's lap. "That's yours to keep. But don't mistake it for reconciliation. It's not an invitation. It's a boundary." Andrew looked up, voice quieter now. "Mom, why didn't you just tell us? Why run?" She stepped closer. "Because I tried telling you for 20 years, Andrew. I told you in the way I cleaned your home while you called me a burden. I told you in the dinners I cooked after my own appointments while Melissa rolled her eyes. I told you in the silence after every time you used my name to sell my work and left me to eat alone. But you never listened. So I stopped speaking." Andrew lowered his eyes. Melissa stepped forward, voice tight. "That painting belongs to us." Evelyn blinked. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Melissa snapped. "It's based on us. It's your son, your granddaughter, your memories. That makes it ours." Evelyn exhaled slowly, as if blowing out decades of held breath. "No," she said, "it doesn't." Melissa's voice pitched higher. "Everything you've painted the last few months, it's built on what we lived through with you. Our family. Our story. You used it for attention. That's our legacy, not just yours." Evelyn stepped into the center of the room, now her voice low but unwavering. "You sold my work behind my back. You erased my name from my own life. You turned me into a relic in a storage closet, and now you want to lay claim to the soul I bled onto canvas to survive it." Melissa opened her mouth, but Evelyn wasn't finished. "You can sell a painting. You can even steal it. But you can't own what it cost me. You can't price a person's soul." Andrew looked stricken, shoulders sinking. "You sold your inheritance," Evelyn whispered, "for a kitchen remodel and a trip to Europe. You traded your mother's love for comfort." Melissa stepped back, quiet now. Evelyn picked up a piece of charcoal from the table and drew a single jagged line down a blank canvas beside her. Then she looked up. "This is the only line that matters between us now. You stay on that side. I'll stay on mine." Andrew's voice cracked. "So that's it. You're just cutting us off forever." She paused. And for the first time that evening her eyes softened. "Not forever," she said. "Just until you remember what love without possession looks like." Melissa turned sharply toward the door. "We came here to make peace. You wanted war." Evelyn didn't move. Melissa hissed, "You'll regret this when the world forgets about your little anonymous act." Evelyn smiled. "They already forgot about me once. It was the best thing that ever happened to me." She turned back to her easel. The visitors were dismissed. Melissa yanked open the door, storming out into the cold. Andrew lingered. "Mom," he said softly, "I'm sorry." She didn't turn around. She simply whispered, "Then let that be your beginning." And with that, he stepped out into the dark. Evelyn stood alone again. But it didn't feel like loneliness anymore. It felt like space, like peace, like the soft breath after a storm. She turned to the canvas beside her, ran her left fingers through the black dust of the charcoal, and began again. The first time Evelyn Hartley walked into the county courthouse in Millgrove, she wore her softest gray shawl and held a folder of her own life in her trembling but steady hand. The clerk behind the desk barely glanced up, filing a complaint. "Yes," Evelyn replied, voice clear. "Forgery, theft, and fraudulent sale of original artworks, all by my son." That got the clerk's attention. She looked up sharply. "I'm sorry, by your son," Evelyn repeated. "Andrew Hartley. The name on the paintings he sold was mine, but the signature wasn't." Inside the folder was everything she'd prepared, scans of her original signatures on paintings, dated between 1985 and 2010, appraisals, letters of authentication from 2 past gallery owners, and a signed affidavit stating she had never granted Andrew or his wife Melissa the right to sell her works. She had even included photographs from her time in the hospital, a subtle reminder that during the window of the alleged transactions she had been recovering from a stroke, incapable of legal consent. The clerk called for a senior officer. Within 30 minutes, Evelyn found herself sitting across from a district investigator. 2 days later, the file was formally opened, and the dominoes began to fall. It started quietly. Just a notification to Andrew's email that a routine inquiry was being made into 2 paintings recently auctioned under Evelyn's name. Then came a phone call from the bank. "We've frozen your checking and investment accounts temporarily. Mr. Hartley, pending review of the fraud report tied to funds received through gallery transactions last quarter. It's procedural, nothing personal." Andrew had laughed nervously. "My mother wouldn't file something like that. She's old. She's confused." But confusion didn't explain the notarized documents. It didn't explain the very real signatures from the very real lawyers, now representing Evelyn Hartley in a civil suit. It didn't explain the email she'd sent directly to the Journal Review, the same paper that once profiled her 25 years ago as New York's surrealist muse. That email containing her declaration had been forwarded across 5 editorial desks in a single hour. By the time the article dropped, the headline was impossible to ignore. "Betrayal in Oil. Son sells mother's art while claiming she's brain damaged." The opening paragraph detailed a horrifying narrative. A once renowned artist allegedly incapacitated her legacy, hijacked by her own flesh and blood. It included quotes from Evelyn's sworn statement, along with past collectors' testimonials confirming Andrew had posed as her legal agent. Social media caught fire. He sold her paintings while she was recovering from a stroke. Imagine stealing from your own mother and cashing in on her trauma. Give Evelyn her justice. #Art is not inheritance. And then came the video. A clip resurfaced from an art symposium Andrew had attended months earlier, where he spoke on a panel about legacy curation. He'd said smugly, "My mother always said art is family. I guess I took that to heart." The video had nearly 2 million views by the next day. Evelyn, meanwhile, stayed off the internet. She painted. She fed the birds on the back porch. She took long walks through the woods with a wool hat pulled low, and her sketchbook tucked under one arm. Her lawyer called every afternoon with updates, which she listened to with calm detachment. It wasn't vengeance. It was clarity. And clarity, she had learned, didn't need volume. It needed precision. Andrew lost his job in less than a week. The firm Monroe and Lane Fine Art Holdings sent him a letter stating he had violated ethical clauses and brought irreparable reputational damage to their institution. The letter was leaked. Melissa received a call of her own. The Community Arts Board she had been part of for 3 years informed her that she would be removed from her position immediately. The partnerships she'd cultivated the gallery show she'd been planning the lecture series she'd pitched it all dissolved in a matter of hours. They were radioactive now. No museum, no school, no collector wanted their name near them. They had built their success atop a woman they believed too old, too weak, too irrelevant to speak. And they'd been wrong. Spectacularly wrong. Melissa's emails to Evelyn went unanswered. So did the letters. So did the voicemail where she sobbed. "We made a mistake. You made your point. Please. Just stop." But Evelyn didn't reply. She let the silence speak. One morning while making tea, Evelyn heard the news on the radio. A cultural roundtable segment was discussing ethics in legacy art sales. One of the panelists, an elderly curator from Boston, said plainly, "What happened to Evelyn Hartley is not unique. What's unique is that she stood up and burned the house down with grace. She didn't scream. She painted." That afternoon her attorney called again. "Are you sitting down?" he asked, barely able to contain his amusement. "Go ahead," she said, sipping her tea. "We just received an official settlement request from Andrew's legal counsel. They're offering to return the remaining funds, just over $184,000, in exchange for dropping the public portion of the suit." Evelyn stirred her honey. "No," she said calmly. The attorney chuckled. "Thought you'd say that." "What's next?" she asked. "Next, the judge reviews the fraud charges. If it goes forward, which it likely will, Andrew could face criminal proceedings." She paused. "I'm not interested in sending him to prison," she said slowly. "I just want the world to stop believing he speaks for me." "And they do," the lawyer replied. "Trust me, they really do." A month later, Evelyn received a package. It was from a former student, a girl named Marin, who had been part of the first wave of foster children she'd taught at Wren Valley back in the late 80s. Inside was a painting. Childlike, messy, vibrant. A woman holding a torch, walking through a storm. Around her feet were tiny figures, children, animals, even flowers, all following her path. On the back, Marin had written in scratchy handwriting, "You lit something in us. Now we see it." Evelyn hung the painting over her kitchen sink. She didn't cry. She just smiled. For the first time in her life, she had burned the bridge and still found herself on solid ground. There were no parties, no champagne, no articles written in her voice, only canvas light and truth. And for Evelyn Hartley, that was more than enough. It was everything. Autumn came early that year, wrapping the world in burnt oranges and muted golds, as if the earth itself had been brushed by Evelyn Hartley's palette. The leaves outside Wren Valley crackled beneath her boots as she stepped onto the porch to retrieve the envelope. She'd known it would come. Inside was a letter thick cream-colored, embossed with a silver emblem. The seal read, "The Halland Society of Contemporary Arts." She read it twice before sitting down. "Dear anonymous painter, your work has opened something raw and necessary in the world. We are honored to extend an invitation to host your first solo exhibition, an immersive gallery experience featuring your complete body of work as the anonymous painter. We believe it is time the world meets you, not as a mystery, but as the force behind the brush. We await your answer. With reverence, Isabel Quinn, Curator, Halland Society." Evelyn folded the letter slowly, heart beating not with fear, but with the rhythm of decision. She stared at the walls of her cottage, at the dozens of faceless portraits, the storm-painted dreams, the fractured reflections that had become mirrors for millions. The question wasn't if she was ready. The question was, how would she show them? 3 weeks passed in quiet preparation. Isabel Quinn was gracious, patient, and respectfully distant. "I trust you," she said on their only phone call. "You tell me what you want and I'll make it happen. Whether you choose to reveal yourself or remain invisible." Evelyn had smiled. "I'll decide on the night of the opening," and Isabel, to her credit, never asked again. The gallery was in downtown New York, an old converted textile warehouse with vaulted ceilings and iron-framed windows that reached 2 stories high. It had once housed looms and sweat, now it would breathe silence and color. Evelyn had shipped over 60 works, each one crated with care, labeled not with titles but with single-word intentions: hunger, loss, forgiveness, shelter, rebirth, silence. The exhibition was called "Unseen: The Voice Between Shadows." The announcement exploded across the art world. Critics whispered it might be the most important show in a decade. Collectors bickered over early access. Academics drafted theories before the first piece had even been hung. But no one knew who the anonymous painter truly was, and Evelyn liked it that way. On the evening of the opening, the gallery shimmered. Spotlights washed the red brick walls in amber. Strings of soft bulbs ran along the ceiling like constellations. Dozens of velvet ropes guided a line of people that snaked halfway down the block. Some were dressed in black tie, others in denim jackets and statement earrings. A group of young women carried a hand-painted sign that read, "She painted my grief before I could name it." Inside, the gallery buzzed with reverence. Each painting was lit with precise museum-quality beams, creating pockets of intimacy amidst the crowd. There were no artist statements, no timeline, only a single plaque at the entrance. "These are not portraits. These are truths. You are not alone." The anonymous painter. Evelyn stood in the back room. She wore black, simple, flowing, timeless. Her silver hair had been brushed into a loose twist at her neck. Her left hand held a slender wooden cane, her right hand still partially curled from the stroke. But in her left, her painting hand now, she held a brush. Not to paint, but to show them who had held the weight all this time. She watched from a crack in the curtain. There was a woman crying softly in front of Reconciliation, a painting of 2 figures almost touching, divided by a wall of glass. A man stood frozen in front of Inheritance, where an elder stood handing an empty frame to a child who looked away. Children pointed at Origin, a massive canvas of a faceless woman with arms outstretched, her shadow-forming wings. Evelyn felt her throat close. The world was here, not for spectacle, but for recognition. And it was time. At exactly 8:47 p.m. the lights dimmed slightly. A spotlight shifted to the center of the gallery. Isabel Quinn stepped forward. Her voice, when it came, was clear and quiet, like a librarian who didn't need to raise her volume to command attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, and all those in between or beyond, thank you for coming." A hush fell over the room. "You've walked among emotion tonight. Grief, rage, longing, hope. All faceless, all yours. But tonight, for the first time, the artist would like to say something. In person. A murmur rose like wind through leaves. Isabel stepped aside, and Evelyn stepped forward. It wasn't dramatic. No fanfare, no swelling music. Just a woman with silver hair, a steady cane, and a brush in hand. The silence was absolute. Some recognized her instantly from old gallery photos from newspaper clippings decades old. But most saw her for the first time. Not a name, not a myth, a presence. She stood before them, eyes sweeping the crowd, slowly allowing herself to feel every heartbeat pressing toward her. She raised the brush once, and then she said, "I am the anonymous painter." A ripple spread through the room. Evelyn continued, voice firm. "For a long time I was invisible. To my family, to the industry I gave my life to myself. I was erased in the place where I should have been safest, my own home." Heads nodded, eyes welled. "I lost everything, but I found a blank canvas." She looked at a young man in the front row. His hand was clutching a sketch pad. "I painted faceless people because I wanted you to see yourself. I painted silence because that's what was left in me. And I painted shadows because that's where I lived. Until I decided to stop asking permission." A wave of emotion surged across the room. She paused, then added softly, "My name is Evelyn Hartley, and this is my voice." She lifted the brush and placed it into a glass jar at her feet, symbolic full circle. A moment passed. Then the applause began. Not the polite kind. The kind that rises in waves unstoppable from the gut of a crowd that has just witnessed something sacred. A rupture. A reckoning. People clapped through tears. And Evelyn just stood there, still, whole, seen. Later, after the lights had dimmed and the gallery had begun to empty, Evelyn returned to the far wall. A girl stood there, no older than 14, quiet, small, alone. She looked up at Evelyn with wide, trembling eyes. "You made me feel like I wasn't broken." Evelyn crouched beside her, knees stiff but willing. "You were never broken," she said gently. "You were just unseen." The girl nodded, then did something unexpected. She took off a bracelet from her wrist, a handmade thing woven from threads, and placed it gently into Evelyn's hand. "For your brush hand," the girl whispered. Evelyn smiled. "Thank you." And for the first time in years, she felt her fingers close around something that didn't need to be painted to matter. It simply was. Real, alive, and hers. The lights in the gallery were dimmed. The last painting softly spotlighted in the distance, a piece Evelyn had saved for this very moment. It was large, 6 feet wide, textured like woven fabric, and entirely white, until one stepped closer and saw hundreds of names scratched into its surface with a palette knife. No color, just pressure, just depth. Some names were sharp, some trembling, some barely visible like ghosts who had whispered themselves into being. At the base of the canvas was a plaque with only one line, "To the unheard." "Now we begin." The room buzzed with hushed voices. Critics stood shoulder to shoulder with teenagers, philanthropists beside nurses, children gripping their parents' hands. The air wasn't just warm, it pulsed with expectancy. This wasn't just an exhibition anymore. It had become a movement, a mirror, a reckoning. Then Evelyn took the mic again, standing in a soft circle of light at the center of the gallery. Her silver hair was braided back now, her posture straight despite the cane. She wore black again, but on her chest was pinned a single white feather, a symbol the children at the art nest had sent her their way of saying, "You carried us." She looked at the crowd with calm, luminous eyes. Her voice, when it came, was strong. "I never planned to come back," she began. "Not to this city, not to this world. But you found me. Not because I asked for it, not because I deserved it, but because you were ready to listen." The audience leaned in, breath caught. "When I disappeared, I did it with $62 and a key around my neck. That's all I had left. That was mine. My name had been sold, my signature forged, my memory rewritten by people I had loved." She paused. "I spent most of my life trying to earn love, to prove that I was worthy of care, worthy of space, of family. I bent myself into silence, into sacrifice, into a version of myself they could tolerate, but no one ever clapped for the invisible woman." A wave of hush rippled across the floor. "Until I stopped asking for applause," Evelyn said. and started painting what it felt like to be erased. She gestured to the walls around them, to the hundreds of canvases that glowed like open wounds. These paintings weren't made to be sold. They were made to survive, to breathe when I could not speak. And now they will speak forever. She took a slow breath. I've been offered a great deal of money for them. 6 figures, some 7, but I've made a decision. A whisper moved through the crowd. I am not keeping a single dollar. People froze. I'm using all proceeds from this exhibition and every future one to establish something I call the Dung Ha Foundation. Named not for recognition, but for reclamation. She looked out across the sea of faces. This fund will be devoted to 2 things: art scholarships for children without parents, and sanctuary grants for elderly women artists who've been emotionally or financially abused by their families. Gasps, audible ones. A woman near the front began to cry. No artist, Evelyn said, should ever fear their own children more than their critics. No mother should be made to feel disposable once her hands stop working. And then came the sound of hurried footsteps. Click, clack, click. 2 figures pushed past the crowd near the back shadows of a past trying to force its way forward. Andrew and Melissa. All eyes turned. Even the spotlight paused. Andrew looked gaunt, paler than Evelyn had ever seen him. His tie was loosened, his suit wrinkled. Melissa wore an expression somewhere between desperation and resolve. In her arms she held a painting, one of Evelyn's old ones, Mercy, the one he had sold. But now it was framed again lovingly. They stepped into the light. Andrew dropped to his knees. The gallery gasped. He didn't speak at first, didn't seem able to. He bowed his head. Beside him, Melissa knelt too, tears streaking her makeup. Mother, Andrew choked out, please. Evelyn looked at them without blinking. He swallowed hard. We were wrong. We were greedy. We were afraid. And we let fear turn into cruelty. I let Melissa, and I... His voice broke. I'm sorry. The entire room was silent. Even the air itself felt suspended. Melissa looked up. You were right. About all of it. The way we treated you. It's not forgivable. But we need to say it, out loud. Andrew added, we don't expect anything. Not money, not family. Just a chance to say we know what we did. He held out Mercy, both hands trembling. Evelyn stepped forward slowly, her cane tapping softly against the polished floor. When she reached them, she didn't take the painting. She didn't touch them. She looked down at her son and the woman he had chosen, and said in a voice clear enough to cut glass, forgiveness is freedom. Andrew looked up, eyes wide hopeful. But I don't forget, Evelyn added. The gallery exhaled like one living body. Click. A camera shutter echoed. Click, click, click. A photo was captured. Evelyn standing tall in black silver hair gleaming, while Andrew and Melissa knelt in contrition, the painting of Mercy between them like a ghost of everything they had broken. The image would go viral the next morning. It would be titled Redemption Isn't Guaranteed. But in that moment no one moved. No one cheered. The silence became holy, and Evelyn turned. She walked back into the gallery, cane tapping slowly, unhurried. At one point a child reached out and took her free hand. Evelyn squeezed it gently. She didn't look back, not to punish, but because she no longer needed to. They were part of her past, and this night, this radiant, impossible night, was her future. Morning light spilled across the hills like honey, soft and golden, brushing the stone pathways of Wren Valley with warmth. A breeze stirred through the pines, carrying the scent of fresh paint, old wood, and something harder to name, something like peace. The cottage was no longer just a cottage. The garden had been expanded, trimmed with benches painted by children. The porch had been rebuilt with wide, welcoming steps and a ramp for wheelchairs. The shutters were now all bright blue, and hanging over the front doorway was a hand-carved sign, its letters carefully painted by dozens of tiny hands in mismatched colors. The Dung Ha House, a community for art and healing. There was always movement now. On any given day, you could find teenagers in the back courtyard sketching scenes from memory. Elderly women gathered around long picnic tables dyeing fabrics, and children. So many children laughing as they dipped their brushes into jars of color, splattering the sun with oranges and purples and joy. Inside, the walls were alive with life. Every hallway, every window frame, every door had been transformed into gallery space, not for collectors, not for critics, but for expression, for voice, for resilience. The youngest students painted on the floor with their shoes off. The oldest sat in rocking chairs beneath skylights and told stories while working with trembling fingers. Some came with wheelchairs, some with therapy dogs, some with memories that left them afraid of silence. All were welcome. And at the center of it all was Evelyn Hartley. She no longer hid behind shadows, no longer signed her work with coded anonymity. Now she wore her name like an open window, and people didn't just respect it, they protected it. She spent her mornings helping the youngest children mix colors. Her afternoons were reserved for quiet studio time, surrounded by the rustling of leaves and the murmur of soft conversation. She'd walk the grounds slowly, her cane barely needed anymore, and sometimes pause just to listen to the wind, to the laughter, to the sound of healing that didn't need language. But this morning was different. This morning was her final canvas. She sat beneath the great oak tree in the courtyard, the one that had watched over the house for more than a century. Around her the grounds buzzed gently. A boy with cerebral palsy was painting with a head-mounted brush beside a woman who had lost her voice to trauma. A former violinist whose hands had stiffened from arthritis sketched a memory of her daughter's wedding. A young refugee girl was translating a poem into a mural line by line in a language Evelyn didn't know but felt in her bones. And Evelyn? She had one last thing to say. Her canvas was large, almost too large for one person to manage, but that was the point. She wanted it to carry everything. With her left hand, she drew the first shape, a woman seated. Not young, not thin, not radiant in the traditional sense, but rooted. A woman with silver hair and weathered hands. A face not detailed, just suggested. The eyes were shadows. The mouth a soft smudge. There was no background, just light emanating from the figure rising, curling outward like smoke or prayer. The title had come to her weeks before. Portrait of the Mother with No Name, because it wasn't about her, not just her. It was about every woman who had given everything until there was nothing left. Every grandmother whose hands had been calloused not just by time, but by silence. Every widow who rebuilt, every artist who hid, every mother whose children chose money over memory, and every soul who had decided to live anyway. With every stroke she let go of another layer. She painted without hurry, without fear. A child passed her a cup of tea mid-morning. A young man handed her a folded note that read, "I found color again because of you." She placed it beside her. In the corner of the courtyard, a local news team had quietly begun filming, as they had been invited to do. They didn't ask for interviews. They simply recorded. Because there are some things that don't need explanation. They need witnessing. As the sun climbed higher, more people gathered. Volunteers, former students, neighbors, strangers who had once seen her paintings online and driven 3 states just to walk the hallways of this place. They stood in a wide circle surrounding her as she finished. Her final brushstroke was not grand. It was quiet. A single line across the figure's heart, barely visible, connecting shadow to light. And then she stepped back, knees cracking slightly, and looked. For a long time no one spoke. Until finally Evelyn turned toward the people around her and said in a low, steady voice, "There are gifts that don't come wrapped in paper." Her gaze lifted to the sky. They come with time, with scars, with brush strokes no one saw but you. They come in the shape of escape and rediscovery, and forgiveness you never thought you'd grant yourself. She looked down at the painting, then back at the circle of faces watching her. And sometimes, she whispered, they come in the shape of finally belonging. A wind moved through the trees. Leaves danced down like applause. Then a young boy, maybe 10, raised his hand. "Is that woman you?" he asked softly, pointing to the portrait. Evelyn smiled. "No," she said. "It's all of us." The group stood still as if carved from something sacred. A photographer captured the moment, a silver-haired woman in black, standing before her final painting, surrounded by children and elders and artists of every shape in history. It would be the last photo ever taken of Evelyn Hartley in front of her own work. It would hang at the entrance of the Dung Ha house, framed in oak and lit by morning light. And beneath it, in a simple brass plaque, the inscription would read, "Sometimes family doesn't come from blood, it comes from respect." As the screen faded to black, the voiceover returned, her voice worn and warm. "There are gifts the world cannot buy. Gifts we leave behind, not in vaults, but in hearts. Gifts that are painted with nothing but a life fully lived." The last frame shimmered in silence. Then one final line appeared on screen. "For every woman who chose herself and never looked back."